All right, so I'll just start with the introductions and everything. Today we're going to talk about pricing models and how to use them effectively. Anything to do with pricing strategy, pricing models, and things like that are one of my favorite topics to cover because I think that the feedback that I've gotten is that really they're quite practical, and I really think that it pays to give freelancers different perspectives that they can learn from and think about doing things differently than they already are. And yeah, it's always been a fun topic that's generated quite a lot of questions, and I really like it. And today we can add a little bit more nuance and depth to our discussion by adding in a new topic, which is the project catalog. I'm going to start by talking about the other pricing models that I'm very familiar with, and also about something that I also think is really important when you're thinking about how you're going to structure your pricing and what kind of model is good for you, is also understanding how to select the right clients for you, how to define what the ideal client is, and how to really create your portfolio and your overview and the way you present yourself around that with that in mind. And something that I've briefly mentioned before but haven't gone into detail with is the project catalog. And I actually spoke briefly with Samantha about this last week. And I initially saw the project catalog as something that could be very valuable and very good for creatives, for people who are working in design and usually are kind of used to selling prepackaged services as it is. And I haven't used it myself until now because I work in marketing and I work on ongoing projects, and I kind of thought that this isn't the right avenue for me. But Samantha very quickly changed my mind about that. That's why I'm excited about today's talk, because I'm actually she's actually convinced me that I should have my own project catalog, and she'll talk more about what we can put in there. Something to note for today's discussion is that we really want to put the emphasis on your questions and what you're curious to learn about. Samantha's presentation is purposely very short so that we can really focus on what you want to hear about and make this discussion as practical and as applicable as we can for you. So some of you probably already know me in the room, but I'm Cata Modorcea. I'm the Upwork Ambassador in Romania. I've been a freelancer for over 7 years now, I think over 7.5 years. And my main background is, as I've said, in digital marketing and project management. And before I start talking about pricing models, I want to address the competitive pricing myth. I think that I can't say this, I can't stress this enough, because I know that especially when people are getting started, they have this tendency of thinking that, the easiest option to be competitive is to charge less than your competition, right? That may be the easiest option on paper or the most obvious one to think of, but it's hardly, if ever, the best one. And top-rated freelancers and people who freelance for a long time almost never compete, or almost never the cheapest option on the table. I can't even remember when or if I've ever had the cheapest option on the table presented to clients. And yeah, that's not the winning solution. Being the cheapest option there is not the winning solution. And this is what I always stress to people, that they shouldn't be overly concerned with the fact that there are freelancers bidding less than you, because that's really not all that clients care about. What people want when they go on the platform and look for a freelancer is somebody who is within their budget, right? And that can mean all kinds of things. And who then, if they're within their budget, they're the best fit, right? And I have hiring experience now as well. I look for freelancers for clients, and I can tell you that it's exactly the same. I've many times had. I mean, I've never really looked at who's the cheapest solution as the deciding factor, but rather who is the best fit and is within budget. Right. So that's why it's really, really important to get good at defining who your ideal client is, what type of client you should go after, because you just need to have a good understanding of what kind of client is going to have a budget for your service, the way you price it, right? Is it going to be a startup? Does their location matter? Is it going to be a small to medium business, an enterprise client? What kind of client is it really? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So let's start with pricing strategies and best practices. And the first thing is to know your pricing models. And the obvious ones that everybody always talks about and debates are hourly and fixed price. But you can really get creative with the way you structure your pricing. You can think about retainer-based pricing, which is something that's valuable when clients just want to kind of book you for when they need you by kind of a fixed amount per month, giving you both a sense of understanding of what the cost is going to be and how available you're going to be. There's also value-based pricing, which admittedly doesn't work for any type of project. This is a pricing model that can be useful if you essentially when you can effectively quantify the value of your service. So for instance, if you're doing ad campaigns, this for instance is based on my experience, this is how I've used value-based pricing. You can quantify the return on investment the clients have. And so when it's very clear and mathematical that they're making a profit, you can then give them these kinds of offers where you can also ask for a commission or a bonus or profit sharing based on your results. I think that retainer-based and fixed price work very well for when you have and when you can have a very specific set of deliverables. It doesn't matter if you're working on a one-time project or an ongoing project, but if you can define a very specific set of deliverables of tasks that you need to do, either once or on an ongoing basis, then fixed price or retainer-based can work very well, because what essentially this way of structuring your payments is that you both have clarity and you both have consistency. The client always knows how much they're going to pay this month and what they're going to get, and they can define based on whatever parameters they have what the project is worth, what the value of it is. And then you also have the benefit of knowing how much you're going to make each month. And something that I like about fixed price projects, and when it's not based on how much you work, but it's just based on the results that you provide the client, is that this way of structuring my payments helps me be really focused on being as efficient as possible, as doing as much with as little time as possible, as being as good as I can be, but also, just being efficient in terms of how I manage my time, which is an incentive that you don't necessarily have when you're working hourly, because, right, if you work less, then you earn less. So it's kind of backwards there. But I do have hourly projects, and I've had them before, and it does make sense for certain types of projects. Specifically, I think that hourly makes a lot of sense when you don't have fixed deliverables, when somebody just wants to know that you're available for a specific amount of time. And when you're using maybe several skills or working on ad hoc, on-demand things that the client needs on an ongoing basis, and it's not just a fixed deliverable, that's when hourly can make quite a lot of sense. And of course, for things like ongoing consulting, if you have a lot of time where you're going to have many client calls or many team calls, it can make sense to go hourly, just so that you're actually getting paid for all the time you're spending in those calls and knowing how much it adds up. All right. And about prepackaged services, which is the project catalog on Upwork, I'm not going to talk about myself because that's why we have Samantha. So I'm going to move on for now and talk about doing your research. So one of the really cool things about Upwork is that it really enables you to learn a lot from freelancers that have already been active for a very long time on the platform, right? So when you search, you have that search bar at the top. Instead of searching for jobs, you can also search for freelancers and agencies by keywords. You just click on the search icon and you change it to look for freelancers and agencies, and you put in your keywords. So if you're a logo designer, you put in logo design. And you can also use some filters. For example, I would recommend you filter people who have a really good high rating of over 90% on the platform, and people who have a lot of earnings, because if they've had a lot of earnings on the platform, all that tells you is essentially that they've been active for a long time and that they're probably doing something right. So there's something that you can learn from them, right? So look for the top freelancers that you can find. And then one of the things that I recommend you look at is their client history, to see what types of projects, what type of work they did that was successful. And if they also don't have private earnings, then you can also learn about, what are the kind of higher paying skills or higher paying kinds of projects that they've worked on, where they can charge higher rates and things like that. So you can really learn a lot from looking at people's client history. And based on that, you can define what type of client you want to work with. If you see that, a particular type, let's say logo design, but for a specific niche, like or graphic design for, let's say, mobile apps. If you see that pays really well and that's something you're good at and would be interested in doing, you can optimize your profile and your approach to attract that type of client, right? And you can also look at the other elements, the way they structure. If they have, for example, case studies in their portfolio, you can look at the way they structure their case studies and what can you learn from that, and to then help you structure your own case studies and your own project samples in your own portfolio. And what do they focus on in their profile description? How do they use the keywords that are relevant to them in their profile, and what kind of elements do they focus on, right? So it's not about copying them, not about copying what they do, but learning from the elements and the structure that they use, because that can be repeated. All right, and then as you progress on Upwork, one of the things that I've noticed freelancers struggle with at a certain point is raising their rates. And the easiest way to do this, and I think that people just need encouragement with this. Don't be afraid to try it. If you have a consistent stream of projects, if you see that you're doing well and getting good feedback with new clients, try a higher rate and see how receptive they are to it. And if new clients are receptive to a higher rate, then it might mean that now you're at that level. And it might also mean that it's worth having this discussion with your existing clients about potentially raising your rates with them. All right, and know your way forward. So this is something that has helped me quite a bit in my own progression as a freelancer, is to think about how you can best apply your skills to earn long-term clients and high value, in-demand roles, right? So when I started more than 7 years ago, I started in the thing that was easiest for me to start in then, and that was social media management. And then I started doing SEO, which paid a little bit better. And then I started doing content marketing and copywriting. And then I kind of thought, how can I apply my skills in even more, in a way that not everybody does. And I moved into more marketing automation, into advertising. And ultimately, what I do now is mostly project management, marketing project management. So it's good to always think about, what's the next step? How can you deliver more value to your clients so that you can charge even more and have even more consistency as a freelancer? And with that in mind, that takes us to selecting clients and winning projects. I think that one of the most valuable things that you can get good at as a career freelancer, as somebody who works full time as a freelancer, is really, really getting good at selecting your clients. Because every time I have discussions about this, this has kind of been the biggest and the hardest learned lesson for freelancers. It's that choosing the wrong client to work with means that you may not earn as much as you deserve. It means that neither you nor they might have a good experience, which reflects poorly on, for both of you ultimately. And it means that, and this is really important, time wasted. If you've worked 3 months or 6 months with the client that you can't then put in your portfolio because it wasn't a very great collaboration or a very great work, then that's kind of time wasted. That, maybe if you hadn't selected him and picked somebody who was a better fit and just been a little bit more patient, then maybe you would have been able to, have 6 months plus working with somebody that's a good experience and that you actually can put in your portfolio. So it's really, really important to be selective. And I don't want to just give you this theory, but I also wanted to talk about something a little bit more practical that you can do. And that is this little set of questions that I've outlined here to help you guide the way in which you define what your ideal client should be, right? So the first question and the obvious question that you should ask yourself is, what size company should they be, And what's important to note here is that depending on what you do, the value of your service it's not just up to you. It's not just up to what you do. It's also up to the client. It's about where they are at a stage, in their growth. Because for me, with marketing, for instance, if I put in the same amount of time, say, 80 hours in a month into a marketing campaign for a company that is at the very earliest stages and they're just launching, and I put the same amount of time, 80 hours, working with an enterprise client on just even smaller tasks, if need be, the probability is that it will be more impactful. My work will be more impactful in an enterprise client just because they're at that stage where any small difference actually has a meaningful return for them. So that's why it's really important to define what types of clients you want to work with, not just in terms of necessarily size, but also type. Like for me, for instance, in marketing, I've noticed that I work best with SaaS clients, with software as a service clients in this kind of industry and in e-commerce, right? There's all kinds of, you can do marketing for just about any kind of company in the world, But for me, the specific type of marketing that I like, I've seen that is most valuable with those two types. And that's why I focus on those, because that's where I can deliver the most value. Right. And then the next question is, why are you the right candidate for them? And here, again, it's important to remember that your rate and your expertise are actually only a fraction of what matters when clients select you. And from personal experience, I can tell you as well that when I hire for my clients, it's quite easy for me often to find a short list of 3 to 5 people who on paper are very similar. They will usually have quite similar prices, or if not, they're all within budget, so it doesn't really matter much. But they have similar expertise. So then in terms of making my decision, I also look at, what's their time zone? Is it going to be easy to work with based on how big the time difference is? I look at things like how quick are they to respond. That's extremely important. And to me, this has been just such an easy and massive selling point that I've been responsive with potential clients over the years, because people really care about this. And I even go so far as to test this sometimes with people, because ultimately, from my perspective, what matters to me is that I find somebody reliable, right? So I can find 5 people who all have good experience, but I want the person who's actually going to be reliable and do their work on time and do it effectively and communicate effectively. So sometimes I even do this. I just ask them a follow-up question and I see who actually replies to me faster. And of course, if somebody replies to me right away, that's a really good sign. If somebody replies to me within a few hours, that's also great. It's also normal because people have other work to do as well. But if somebody comes back to me 2-3 days later, then that's a big warning sign for me. So this is something that you can really consciously take advantage of. If just knowing that people really care about how quick you are to respond and how good you are at communication, and make that clear from the start. Be responsive quickly when they ask you something, and make your structure of communication clear to them, saying that, when we start working together, I'll be available here on Upwork over email. If you use anything else like Slack, we can talk there, etc. Make your communication clear. And another thing that is really refreshing is when freelancers have a clear process in mind for how they're going to do the work with you, right? So another example from personal experience, I especially in design, it's kind of easy to find a lot of talented designers out there because there's so many of them out there. For one specific project, I remember that I made the choice just based on the fact that one of them had a very clear process outline in their proposal where they said, first step, I need this information from you. Second step, I'll give you the first reviews and blah, blah, blah. They just outlined the process from there. And I just knew that I'm going to have to do very little management of that project. And that's really always very refreshing. She told me what she needs from me. I'm going to provide that. Then the work's going to get done. It gives me a sense of trust because she has the whole process outlined, so I can believe that she can respect the timeline that she set for it. And it just makes the decision much easier when you know that the person's not going to need a lot of micromanagement or a lot of thinking from your side to do their work. Right. So next question, how should they work with you? Time zone, project size, project duration. So here is something that's kind of good for you to think about is, for instance, the project duration. Like me, for example, I don't know if I send more than 5 to 10 proposals per year on Upwork. And the reason why that happens is, yeah, very few. And the reason why that happens is because I've learned to work with long-term clients. And any one of my clients, looking back, I think have had a duration, a lifetime of working together of 1 to 3 or more years. So I very rarely have any spots open that I need to fill with new clients. And when I do, it's kind of easy to find a new client because I'm very, very selective about it, because I need a very small number of projects for a long time. So to me, I can really spend a lot of time looking for the right client and finding the one that's ideal for me to work with. And when I find him, I can spend the time to write a great proposal, not copy paste one, right? Because it's really the amount of time is meaningless in a year. Even if I spend 3 hours writing a proposal, which I don't, but that wouldn't even matter if I needed to, right? Because if I only send 5 to 10 proposals per year and that gives me all of this work, then it's completely worth it. How will they measure the value of your service, right? So here again, you have to try to put yourself in your client's shoes, because sometimes the way they measure the value of your service is ROI. For instance, in the case of advertising, that's pretty easy, return on investment. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just time saved. Like sometimes people actually are themselves experts in what they do, but they just don't have time to do it anymore. So what they want is somebody who can take that off their plate. And what matters to them is that you have the expertise they have, so they can easily communicate with you, that you have the availability that they don't have, and that you're good at communication and you're trustworthy and reliable, so that they know that they can entrust you with passing on their work without there being any downside for them. And another couple of things, if you have unique expertise or if it's unique style fit based on what the client requests, you can also think about that. All right, update your profile and proposals to match. So once you've defined your ideal client, focus your profile on the skills and approach your ideal client will be looking for. You can use your cover letter to highlight the approach that makes you the right fit for them, and highlight the soft skills and work ethic that make you a better candidate than others with similar experience and rates, like we talked about before. All right. And finally, be proactive. Don't wait for the perfect invitation. Start searching for relevant projects when you need them. Experiment with Upwork filters and keywords, because with Upwork filters, something that I've noticed myself is that when I search for projects based on keywords, sometimes I'm missing out on great projects. And this is, I'll give you a practical example. Let's say that I want to get, projects that are related to Facebook ads. And I search for projects by using the keywords Facebook ads. But I might not see the projects from a client who's looking for somebody who has Facebook ads expertise, but actually phrases their project as looking for an advertising specialist to help with social media campaigns, right? If they don't phrase it using the same keywords you've used, you're essentially not going to find their projects. And so sometimes it can make more sense to have a broader search, of, let's just say you're looking for, let's say a different example, graphic design projects, and just scroll through a bigger list, but see if you don't find better options that way than by limiting to specific keywords. And for efficiency, you can always save your search in Upwork so that you don't have to repeat putting in the same filters all the time. And something that I always recommend is to submit a bid within 24 hours from the time the project was posted. This, again, it's because that's when people are most active. And I see this habit in myself as well. When I post a project, I know, because this is Upwork, that within 24 hours, I'm going to have a bunch of proposals to look at. So I post a project, I'm active that day, and maybe the next day I'll go back and see what projects I got. And from that, I'll make a short list. And then I might continue my conversation with people in the short list. And once I've made that short list of people who I think that, out of those 5 people, one of them is almost definitely a good fit and I'm going to hire them, there's no point after that to just keep looking at whatever else comes in too, just because that wouldn't be an efficient use of time, if I keep doing that. So that's why it's really important to submit a bid within 24 hours. And to do that, you can always, not filter your searches, but sort your search results on Upwork by the most recent ones posted. All right. And now I'm going to pass it over to Samantha, and then we're going to take your questions.
Hey there, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Samantha Huls. I am a customer onboarding webinar host here at Upwork. So I host a couple different webinars, all kind of dealing with product, and most notably the Beginning Your Freelancing Journey one, but you may have also attended my project catalog one. And so we'll kind of go do a short version of that just to kind of give you an overview of the product and some of the things that you can do with this feature. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So there are some clear advantages. What is Project Catalog, right? So Project Catalog is a secondary way to earn on the platform. So you'll definitely still be able to utilize the marketplace in which you've been doing so, by submitting proposals. But now we have this other option too. So Project Catalog allows you to create projects with predefined scopes, timelines, prices, deliverables, and clients will then come to you. They're essentially looking through an entire catalog full of these pre-packaged, predefined projects. And so I always urge people that do very repetitive work, like if you're, like a graphic designer, or you work on some kind of project-based deliverable, and you find yourself doing the same thing quite a bit for other clients. That could be something that you offer on Project Catalog. Clients are looking for very simply predefined projects that they can just purchase and get work started right away. Next slide. So there are some clear advantages to using Project Catalog. Obviously, there's less back and forth with clients because you set the scope and the price and everything all up front. It's definitely more efficient for your workflow too, because you are setting the parameters and clients are coming to you. So you're not having to spend the time that you may be spending with a proposal. But I will say though, you definitely do want to spend time on this listing just like you would a proposal, because if anything, you want to spend more time on it because you want to make sure that it's very thorough and you have all of the objectives defined very clearly prior to it being purchased. And ultimately, you work on the projects that you want to work on because you built them. So if you find yourself getting really tired of doing one type of work, you could put on a project that you just really enjoy working on. Like maybe you just really enjoy working on resumes. You could put on a resume project, and that just allows you more flexibility in doing some of the work that you enjoy. Next slide. So this is really just a picture of what it looks like from the client's perspective, right? And so as you can see, we've got like the gallery image. So Project Catalog is very image based. That's not something to deter people that aren't working in some kind of graphic field. You can definitely put in a stock photo. If anything, stock photos look really beautiful. So you could get a stock photo that's relevant to what you're offering, and just make sure you have the licensing to be able to utilize it. And then, you have your service tiers here. So these are the various prices that you would be charging. You can select between 1 and 3 tiers whenever you're setting this up. And so if you want 3 different tiers, that's great. It allows your client some flexibility in what they purchase. If you only want 1 tier because, for example, maybe you're putting up a consultation, then, you would just put the 1 tier. Another thing on this page I want to draw your attention to as well is that it does feed in directly to from your profile. So as you can see, John Doe here with his 5 stars and 6 reviews, he's top rated plus freelancer. That feeds in directly from your profile. So if we were actually in a live listing, at the bottom you would have like your bio and your overview and all of that kind of stuff. So it's very, very important that you update your profile and make sure it is accurate and relevant before you create a listing, because we want to make sure everything that feeds in looks great and is up to date. Next slide. So I do have some tips for some creating projects. So I know like when you first get started with a project, it can be kind of daunting, right? It's like, what do I do first? Well, definitely there's going to be a lot of planning associated with getting these projects created. And so some of the things that you should consider is, is your project attractive to clients? That's, a big deal, because your client is essentially the one that's going to be browsing you and deciding, is this something I want to purchase? It's kind of like when you go to the store and you see a bunch of the same thing. Which one are you going to go with? Are you going to go with the one that is the prettiest? Are you going to go with the one that's kind of like, So it's the same thing with Project Catalog, right? And so you'll want to choose professional images that speak to your work and make sure you have the right to publish them. So like I said, stock photos are fine. Just make sure you have the rights to them. And then make your project easy to browse. Make sure that if you're using jargon, you define it. It's very important that you're speaking in a way that makes sense to maybe someone that doesn't have that expertise. And then proofread your work. This is super important. If you are just one of those people that's just like very bad about grammar and spelling, which is fine. I'm guilty too. You could use something like Grammarly, which is a third-party grammar tool, or have a friend look over what you're going to write. Just make sure that you have that accountability and you're making sure your grammar is on point. In addition, carefully select your category, because clients will not be able to find projects in categories where they don't belong. Don't use clickbait, text-heavy graphics. Don't use the Upwork logo or badge. And then obviously don't share your contact information or any other personal information, because we want to keep you safe on the platform. Also, we can't advise you on the exact price or the exact scope or the substance of your project. That's completely up to you. But I hope that through this Q&A and through this webinar, you're starting to come up with some ideas and get to that point where you're ready to put up an awesome project catalog listing.
Is there let me see if is there any, okay, Q&A. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Samantha, for the quick intro. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And all right. I also have a few of my own questions I wanted to ask you. But let me see first. Okay, that's not really questions. All right, so let's also take questions from the panelists. And again, I wanna reiterate to people that there's the Q&A section and there's the chat section, which are different. And ideally, if you can put your questions in the Q&A, that'll help make sure that we don't miss anything. The one question here is in the chat: what do you suggest for beginners? In terms of, oh, is it, are you I actually would like to get a bit more info here. Are you a beginner on Upwork in general or a beginner to the project catalog? I think that would be good too. Okay, if you can reply to that, okay, all right. And we have a couple more questions come in. Catalin, you mentioned about adding a portfolio. Are you adding to portfolio the client or the project? Well, so this kind of depends. I would say that it makes most sense to use your portfolio as a way to reference your projects, not the client as a whole. And this, I think, is also very useful to people who have work experience but have not worked on Upwork before. I think that can be very valuable for them there, because one of the questions that I get from people who have a lot of work experience, even years, but are new to Upwork is, how can they stand out even though they don't have any history on Upwork? And the portfolio can also really help you there. If you can put together case studies of, what were the actual results that you did for the client, what was the process in terms of working with them and things like that. So I would definitely focus more on the project and what you did and what the impact was, rather than who the client is. But you can also, if you have really big clients, you can highlight that just as a trust building factor, that if these big clients trusted you and worked well with you, then it's probably a good sign. Okay, let's see. All right, so we have another question that are about milestones, but I want to first address some questions that have to do with the project catalog, because this is something that we so rarely discussed. And one of the really interesting things that Samantha shared with me last week is that you actually work in e-learning, and you use the Upwork project catalog as a way to generate leads and to do paid consulting. So how does that work, and how do you recommend people who are not creatives can actually use the project catalog?
That's a great question. Yeah, because I mean, personally, like I'm not a graphic designer. I do content writing and I do learning design. And so that can be kind of tricky when you're thinking about, the kind of work that I've done in the past is mostly custom. How would I utilize this service if I have a completely custom project? Obviously, I think one of the things that people struggle with the most is like, I can't define every aspect of this. And no, you can't create a custom project catalog project. That's not the point. The point is to create pre-decided, predetermined deliverables, right? And so one of the ways that you can utilize project catalog within a field that might be more custom is to have these consultation services, right? And so some clients, they might need a consultation and they might be able to go do the work on their own. So like for example, if I do social media management, I can teach a client something in an hour that they can then utilize and do on their own, and they're paying me for the knowledge I'm giving them. Okay. But then, like, let's say that the client's like, oh, actually, I don't want to do this on my own. Then that consultation can be like, okay, well, what do you need from me? And then I can propose new work to the client. And so this is an opportunity for me to upsell myself, upsell my skills, and create secondary contracts off of just a, 30-minute or an hour long consultation.
Yeah, and that's why I'm now really excited about the project catalog too, because this is something that we all do anyway. We have those initial discussions with clients, and we don't actually get paid for them usually, right? So with this is a way in which we can monetize our first discussion with clients, which helps in us generating leads, new leads in multiple ways, and also, getting paid for the amount of time that we spend sharing our knowledge. Because, similarly to you, just looking back, I've had, again, I'm quite selective about the projects that I work on, because, like I said, I think that the value of my service also depends on where they are as a stage in the business. So I've had who knows how many discussions with potential clients where I've given them some insights that are really, really useful and practical that they can use to do something at the stage that they're at. But it wasn't the right fit for me. They weren't the right person for me to work with, because they were too, it's too early stages, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to pay high rates, and it wouldn't have made sense for me to lower my rates, right? So I'm really excited now about using this, because I see it as a way of using the knowledge that I've accumulated in the past 7.5 years, but actually getting paid for it, like you're supposed to when you consult people. So that's really cool. I really like that. And then I actually got asked this question last time I brought up the project catalog, and I remember the question because it was a pretty good one. And really, why I want to bring it up again is because I answered it then, but I think that a lot of people might be struggling with the same thing. And so in creatives, who this actually makes a lot of sense for, are struggling with, well, yeah, but if I could do 100 different types of services, it's going to take me forever to create 100 different project catalog, or yeah, projects.
Mhm.
But well, my feedback there was that you don't have to create something for all of them. It's kind of like you suggested, you create your favorite ones, create the best ones, and the ones that you
Yeah,
think are more popular. Yeah.
right, exactly. And I mean, the good news is we did up the limit on the amount of projects you can have, so you can have up to 20 now. But I will warn you, that is a lot. So just because you can have 20 doesn't mean you should,
Yeah.
maybe not. And so you can have up to 20. And then in addition, each project can run simultaneously up to 5 times each. So, I mean, that's a lot of ongoing projects potentially. So you're right, creating the projects that you enjoy working on the most. Honestly, I think the best projects are the ones that you can define clearly, because I think that when it comes to project catalog, the less opportunity there is for issues about scope, the better. So really what you should be doing before you get on and actually post your project is really think the project out from start to finish. Something I always recommend too is if you have a project that you've worked on in the past that was really cut and dry, worked out really well, just a really efficient process, model your listing after that. It doesn't always have to be, you don't have to throw the kitchen sink at it. You can just pick the
Yeah.
ones that work the best for you.
Yeah. Um. All right. I'm looking for more project catalog questions. In the project catalog, can we post portfolio projects as well? And what information should we post? Links, documentation, technical, or functional?
That's a great question. So actually, Project Catalog, you don't want to spend a lot of time on your listing, um, like linking to other things, or you don't really want to do that. So the listing should be preserved for the scope and the detail of the actual project you're offering. Your profile is visible through this listing. So when a client wants to go look at your previous work, they can click on your name and go right to your profile, which is what they do. So, what I would recommend instead of getting wrapped up and trying to put all of your portfolio and all of that stuff on the listing itself, don't worry about that. Use the listing to focus on the job or the task you're going to be doing, and make sure your profile is updated, because your feedback and everything pulls directly in from your profile. So if your profile is updated and everything looks great on that end, you should have no problems, because the client can very easily navigate over to your profile, and your JSS feedback, all your public feedback shows up at the bottom of the page anyway.
Cool. All right. And then a kind of a follow-up question to that would be, well, it's from somebody else, but it's it's connected. When somebody is hired from the project catalog section, does that count in the same system of measurement that is shown in the My Stats section, particularly the you were hired percentage bar?
That's a great question. I haven't gotten asked that one before. I believe they're separate, but we currently don't have insights available for Project Catalog. So keep an eye out for it. It has been a hot topic lately with freelancers. I hear it a lot in the community and I hear it a lot on my own webinars about, I know you guys want the stats from Project Catalog. We're working on it. That's all I can say.
All right. Let's see. Okay. So I'll just because there's a lot of those as well. When you work with fixed price milestones, do you usually treat the project? How do you usually treat the project revisions? Do you set a percentage of the total time and include it in the estimation? Project revisions. Well, it depends on the type of work you do. Really, I don't really have this particular thing. So I know that with, for instance, with let's say content writers, very often they'll have a limited number of revisions that you can ask for within a certain price, right? So they'll give you a fixed price for, and this also works in the project catalog. It's pretty much the same system there. You'll usually, they'll give you a fixed price for the content and X amount of revisions. And then anything that's more than those revisions, you charge extra. Um, Okay, when you were talking about response time while hiring, looking for people that answer in a timely manner, how does this apply to freelancers that are waiting for clients that are slow to respond? Should we look elsewhere when a client isn't that involved? So I have a very simple way of thinking about potential projects and potential clients. I'm always extremely objective about it, and I like to just think of it like planting seeds. I've sent a proposal, or I've sent a message, or I've replied to a request. I've planted that seed, and now it's the ball is in the client's court. If they want to work with me, it's their turn to say something, because I always have a very specific call to action. And this is something that's important to do when your messages to clients. Make sure that they know that the ball is in their court, that it's their turn now to have an action to come back to you, right? So if it's your cover letter, it's hey, let's find a time to talk. When can we do that? When you need something from them, request that. And every now and then, especially if it's a project that you like, you can just check in if 5 days or 7 days have passed and they haven't gotten back to you. Hey, just checking in to see if you have an update about the project. Nobody minds that you do that. It's normal to check in like that. But I don't think about it beyond that. I just plant seeds, and not a lot of them usually, because like I said, I think it's important to also be selective, and just see what happens. Just plant it and leave it there. Okay, I have interesting project catalogs, but with all that, I don't receive answer for my submissions to client jobs. What should I do?
I think if you're having trouble capturing people on Project Catalog, I think the first thing you should look at is it's always good to be like introspective, right? So like first look at your own listing. Is there an issue with your images? Maybe they're not relevant, or maybe they're just not very like attractive. If you feel like all of that is fine, then I would encourage you to browse other projects in your category, kind of like what we were talking about with profile creation and looking at other successful freelancers profiles. I mean, very similar with that. You could see what other people are offering. You could see kind of how they go about broaching the topic of scope. That could be an issue. Maybe you're being too vague and clients just don't feel confident. So there could be a number of factors. And so what I would encourage you to do would be to, one, look at your own listing first and just make sure that everything is defined, it makes sense, everything looks attractive. And if you feel like it's, perfect, then I would browse other projects in your category to see what other people are doing and see if there's anything that you could perhaps borrow and repurpose from them, because that's always the best way to be successful, is to imitate success.
Yeah, and also you can look at people who not just have similar types of projects listed, but also have a similar price to yours, but a lot more reviews, so a lot more work done. So that's a great one. If they are similar in terms of price and in terms of service, but they have a lot of of reviews, and you don't, then see what they might be doing differently. And like Samantha said, I think that quite often it can just be something that's not even related to your service, like the image or the way you phrase your little intro snippet, right? Or how well you use your keywords, because And that's the other thing. You have to be discovered in order to be hired. So using the right keywords and optimizing your description is really, really valuable in that sense. And also, I just remember because you mentioned Grammarly. So Grammarly, I think, is great for anybody to use, whether your English is perfect or not. I use it, and it's a free tool, and it's just there's so many little things that are easy to miss when you're writing messages to people, and just Grammarly is something that you can install on Chrome, and it just lets you know every time when you've made either a contextual error or a grammatical error or anything like that, or you forgot to put a little comma somewhere. It's really useful and it's free, so I highly recommend it. Um, all right, question here. You said about the language, specifically jargon. What is the level of knowledge or expertise we should expect from a client? Ooh, so uh, this really depends on the client, right? And that's something to watch out for. And it also depends very much on what type of work you do, because, for instance, when it comes to marketing, something that I've noticed is that people who have businesses that are at a certain level have at least some understanding of marketing jargon, right? And so things like ROI and PPC and SEM and things like that, those kinds of marketing specific jargon are usually quite known to business people. However, if you do something like this, like development, that's somewhere where if a business person will want to hire you, but their actual level of knowledge and jargon is usually very limited, very low. Usually, it's not developers hiring developers. It's it's business people. So it depends on the type of work that you do, but it generally is. And even for me, I generally avoid using industry specific jargon, just because some people might know it, but nobody will. And there's no downside to speaking in a way that is easy to understand by everybody, because you're not missing out on anything. Somebody who knows technical jargon related to marketing or development or anything else will understand my presentation in layman's terms, right? But the other way does not apply. If I use technical jargon, then I'm going to be missing out on all the people who won't understand it. So yeah, I would say to do it like that. Samantha, what do you think?
No, I totally agree. I think that, I mean, we work on a global platform. And so you have to realize that not everybody has the same level of English proficiency as you do. And so it's important that you try to simplify things as much as possible. And then when you get into your consultation, feel it out. If you're talking with someone that obviously knows what they're talking about, then pull out that jargon and, impress them, show them what you can do. But
Yeah.
if they really don't know what they're talking about, or they're probably hiring you because they don't know what they're talking about, I would really, really encourage you to just try to simplify. And also, one of the things that I like about like third party tools like Grammarly and things like that, or even use a thesaurus, you could find words that are a little bit simpler for words that you're trying to use. So
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point, actually. Yeah, if you see if you are in discussions with a potential client that you see is using a lot of industry specific jargon, then absolutely follow suit. Because it shows that you also understand what they're talking about, and you also have expertise in the field. All right, question here. If I develop a downloadable course/training material, would this qualify as a project within the project catalog?
yeah, I think that would definitely work. I think you'd have to really define it. I mean, obviously, if it's something that is kind of one size fits all, so it's like maybe like a training course on SEO, that could be really lucrative, honestly, because I'm sure a lot of people, especially smaller clients, don't want to hire someone on an ongoing basis and would rather just have the skills for themselves and do it themselves. So this is great. I think that's a really great idea.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, all right. Can I, hello, can I post my client logo on my work sample? I have this agreement for posting his site logo. If you have their approval to use their logo, then yes, as long as you have their approval. It's obviously not a good idea to use their logo if you don't have their approval, but I don't see why it would be a problem otherwise. Um, can you choose to get out of a, well, here's a good one. Can you choose to get out of a contract started through the project catalog? At what stage?
I was waiting for this one because I get this question every time I talk about this. Okay, so a couple of things. Let's say that, okay, because obviously with Project Catalog, you kind of relinquish a little bit of control, right? Because now the clients are coming to you. You're not necessarily vetting the clients. So I know Cata talked very intensely about vetting clients. So this is kind of the opposite of that, right? But good news, you do have 24 hours to cancel a contract for any reason without it affecting your JSS score. So as soon as you receive the email or the notification, I would go check the client out like pretty much immediately. Or at least see like, is this something that I want to deal with? Do I have the time? What the circumstances are surrounding the purchase. And then within 24 hours, and I also get questions like, well, what if, I'm asleep when I get the notification? I'm like, well, you don't sleep for 24 hours. So you'll have time, you'll have time. So even if they're in a different time zone than you, and you're maybe 12 hours ahead or whatever, you'll still get to it within a timely fashion. So 24 hours. However, if like you're kind of like maybe unsure or like you're getting to a contract and it's just like kind of like not working, it's exactly like a fixed price contract. So that's something I want to tell everybody. It's just like entering into a fixed price contract. So you're able to end the contract early, but do keep in mind this could affect your JSS. It affects your project completion rate, things like that. So there are options. It's not like you are just stuck in it indefinitely. But it's once they actually purchase the project, it's like being in a fixed price milestone contract. So if you have context and you've been in one of those before, it's almost exactly the same. So once you have finished the work, you submit the work just like you would a milestone, and then you would get paid that way. So, but that's kind of the broad strokes answer. Of course, there's always specifics, but I want to also remind everyone that communication is key and that we definitely don't always have to have disputes, because sometimes we can just talk these problems out. So if you're having struggles or, something is a little bit more difficult than it should be, have a conversation with your client and open up that communication with them.
Yeah. All right. One question we had before: how do you usually think about your milestones? Do you use any strategies behind that? Yeah. Well, it's also, to me, I use milestones in two ways. One, especially with new clients or clients who are not as well vetted, I might use it as a what do you call it, as a safety net. Like I might ask for the first milestone to be a percentage of the project in advance. And beyond that, it's kind of about deliverables. Like usually milestones are based on the deadline for specific deliverables. So if I have monthly deliverables, the milestones will be based on when those are due. And once they're due, I add the milestone and it gets paid and things like that. All right. All right. There's one question, but what advice can you give to a beginner who's never worked on the platform before? This is a tough one. There's a lot to say on this. Like basically look at all the webinars and apply all the things from all the webinars. There's no one answer. I think that it's a sequence of things that you have to do right. But in terms of, let's say, from a more of an encouragement perspective, I would say that the number one thing is to apply, to learn from other freelancers, and to experiment with what you've learned. So if you think that you know the right way to apply to a project, or to choose a project, test that out, apply to the specific type of project and see how it goes. And don't get stuck if if you don't have the results that you anticipated. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over again for the whole year. Don't get stuck on one way of doing things. Think about what you can change, think about what you can do differently, and what you might be able to improve in order to to do better and better. All right. Can we find other webinars on the platform? Yes, there is now a page where all webinars go. This one is going to be, it's also recorded, and it's going to be, you'll be able to re-watch it there. And it's upwork.com/community/events. And I'll put the link in, I'll just open it real quick, and I'll put the link in our chat as well, so you can find it easily to everyone. There it is. So I just put it in the chat, upwork.com/community/events. All right. While we wait for a few final questions from our audience, I had a couple more for Samantha. So you already talked about some things that people should avoid doing. Are there any other broader mistakes that you see people doing with Project Catalog, or types of projects that you see where you see somebody should be doing this differently, that you would advise people?
Yeah, I think a lot of people underbid themselves, and I think that's kind
Mm.
of a bummer
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, the only person that suffers when you underbid yourself is you.
Yeah.
So I would really suggest doing the research to see what other people with similar expertise, you know, you don't want to charge what an expert charges unless you are an expert, and you don't want to charge what a beginner charges unless you are a beginner. What other people in your field are charging, and hold yourself to those industry standards. And so I think the biggest mistake people make is they think that project catalog is an easy way to do things, but it's not necessarily easy. It's just different, right? So with a proposal, you should never copy and paste. You should always do a custom proposal. You should spend time doing it. Same thing with project catalog. You should spend time creating a listing. The contract part is easier because you don't have to do the whole contract thing. All the client has to do is press purchase, and then it starts the contract immediately. But you do have to be very clear in how you define your deliverables. You'll have to still add project steps. You'll still have to kind of give a very thorough overview. So there are definitely lots of things that you still have to account for, and the process can get kind of tripped up. And so, what my biggest piece of advice for people that are just starting, that are having problems, or maybe just like struggling with this feature, is to spend time planning. Because I think if you plan and you think about these things ahead of time, it's going to benefit you in the long run because you'll have a much more cohesive project, and it'll make a lot more sense when the client purchases it and starts to move through some of those milestones.
Yeah, and yeah, something that I saw that I think is really important for people to leverage right about this is the project, the process steps. So how would you say people should think about the process steps in a way that ensures also, you know, a comprehensive understanding of what people will get, but also just a good um, let's collaboration on the specific project that they've posted?
Yeah, I think a lot of times us as freelancers, we don't want to always check in unless the client wants to check in, but I think that's the wrong mentality. I think we should lead the way on communication as far as defining like, hey, these are our check-in points. This is when we're going to have a conversation about this and this and this and this and this. And obviously if the client wants to check in more. But I think it's good to be proactive with these types of things because that makes you look better and that makes your JSS possibly better because the client feels more like you're supportive, you're there, you're on top of things versus that they feel like they're constantly having to hound you about stuff. So with the project steps, it's important to consider things like a consultation time, like having kind of a time to say, okay, this is the overview, this is what we're going to be doing, and then also having revision time. So like you know, you submit like the first draft and then you give them the chance to revise and then they send it back and then, you know, second draft, so on and so forth, depending on what your deliverable is. And so building in these types of things is really important because, like I said, you want to look proactive. You want to look like you're on top of it. You never want the client to have to manage you because you are the independent
Yeah.
professional. It is your business.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, and one thing that I would add is just always before getting started, make sure that you always have all the resources you need from the client, right? Because that you can say that, you know, maybe you can estimate that it takes you 3 days to do something, but really that depends on whether or not you have all the resources you need. So that's why the first step should always be that making sure that you have the resources you need, and people understanding that only then it's, you know, it's, if it takes you 3 days, it's 3 days from the point when you actually have everything, right? And another thing again to consider, especially if you're doing things like content writing, is to add in how many revisions you're willing to do and things like that, and you can add in those details very easily. And that's one of the cool things that I see in the project catalog, is that you can add those tiers. And that's like, you know, for people who need, people are going to be willing to charge, to pay more usually for something that's really urgent, right? So you can upsell that in a sense, doing something more urgently. For instance, you can pay a standard price and a delivery timeline within a week, and if somebody needs it done within a day or two, then you can charge double, you know, or things like that. So you can think about how you can, yeah, charge based on other factors like urgency. Cool. Well, that's, I think that's our time. This was, thank you all for participating, for all the great questions. Let's see. There's just one more short question that I'll answer real quick. Do you choose clients that do not have any hiring history? A client without any hiring history could break the freelancer rating. The client is really bad or on. So, you know, you can just be more careful about vetting. vetting your clients if they're brand new to the platform. One thing that's important to me is to make sure that they have their payment method verified. Beyond that, I don't really care if they're new or not, because like I've actually gotten one of the best clients that I've worked with was brand new to the platform, and he actually had a business that was up and running. He had one of the first online businesses in his industry, and he's had it for over 20 years. Fantastic person to work with, real workaholic. It was a great it was a great experience. And he was brand new to the platform, but he had like 100 projects open. Like he really went all in. Yeah. So to me, that's not the fact that they're new, that they don't have hiring history is not on its own a reason not to work with the client. I would look more at how they communicate what they want, and just, yeah, if you don't have a lot of information about them, then don't just start the project with them, but make sure you have a one-on-one discussion with them first, get to know them, and figure out who their company is and how reliable, trustworthy they are as a client. All right. So I think that's about it for today. Thank you again, Samantha, so much for joining us. I'm
Thank
really
you.
excited about setting up my own one or two projects to the project catalog. And thank you everybody with the questions and for participating. Thank you guys. Goodbye.